Remember this video where I talked about all the crap you can fit in that tiny nook? Well, after that video went live, I received an email saying, yo, Jay, you want a Fragbox? And I'm like, am I being threatened? The heck is a Fragbox? This is a Fragbox. Oh, and it's from Falcon Northwest. NZXT Canvas monitors feature more of what gamers want. The Canvas 1440p QHD offers a 165Hz refresh rate for the perfect balance between performance and resolution, while the 1080p Full HD Canvas delivers 240Hz for a competitive edge. Both versions feature AMD FreeSync Premium, 1 millisecond response time, and OSD settings via CAM, allowing for specific settings between games. To see the complete list of Canvas monitors and monitor mounts from NZXT, follow the link in the description below. If you haven't heard of Falcon Northwest, they're an SI, a system integrator. They've been around for over 18 years. Well, I guess technically their company's almost old enough to drink, or already is, depending on the country you're from. Anyway, the email basically said, hey, do you want to see a real small form factor PC? Do you want to see one that doesn't compromise by having a custom low power output motherboard with a tiny SFF or SFX power supply that wouldn't be able to, you know, power even the weakest of graphics? I mean, technically it was a 3080 Ti in there, but it would never be able to power any sort of 40 series graphics cards. So they have the Fragbox, and this is a very small form factor, non-compromising PC build. So this is like the perfect case slash build for anyone that has a small amount of space that they have to, and they don't want to compromise on the size computer in terms of the components that are in it, or anyone that likes to travel around to different LAN parties and stuff. Look, I know some people are like, traveling around to LAN parties, who does that? You'd be shocked at how many people actually spend a serious amount of time and investment flying all over the country and world just heading to some of these crazy LAN parties that are like DreamHack, for example. Anyway, but it is a small form factor PC that doesn't compromise, oh, it's a box in a box, lovely, that doesn't compromise in the parts that are available to fit it. So if I'm not mistaken, this particular one that I'm still working on getting out of the box here has a mini ITX motherboard, or Intel motherboard with a 13900K. It has an RTX 4090, and all of the supporting parts to go with it, including a 240 AIO. So this is a black case. I believe there's different size cases that or different color cases you can get. They even offer UV printing and stuff to put custom designs on chassis and laptops and all that. And Falcon Northwest doesn't just make small form factor PCs and laptops. They make all sorts of different chassis sizes and builds to fit your budget. So even though we are looking at like a top tier spec out Fragbox here, you can get them in both Intel and AMD and all sorts of different configurations that would fit your budget. So I pull this off, there you go. That is the size of the Fragbox. Initially, it's a little bit bigger than like say a high-end projector. It's not, that handle really does come in handy, I'm just gonna say. So there it is, nice matte anodized black. I do believe these are aluminum pieces here. Yeah, this is pretty sick. Every side so far has ventilation on it except for the very front. But before I start digging into here, I wanna see what is inside this other box. I believe this is gonna be our peripherals and stuff, the stuff that comes with the motherboard, extra power supply cables, all that sort of stuff. Now, in terms of performance though, pretty much all the ITX motherboards, especially the like the Z790 ITX motherboards or Z690, depending, I'm not sure which one this is in here, they're gonna be able to give you a mug. Falcon Northwest mug, plastic. That's perfect for someone like me. But that's a really neat shape. Check that out. So this is also a thank you card on behalf of Kelt Reeves, who is the president. It says, on behalf of Falcon Northwest, I'd like to thank you for selecting us. We know that choosing your PC maker can be a hard decision, and we are confident that you've selected the finest custom PC made. Enclosed are a few items to show our appreciation that we hope you'll enjoy. If there is ever anything I or my staff can do for you, please don't hesitate to contact us. I've had quite a few conversations with Kelt prior to this video or this case and PC build arriving. I believe they stand by their product, and they've been around for over 18 years, like I've said, so they've got a lot of experience to back that up. So here are the extra cables and stuff I said would more than likely be in there. Ooh, coffee beans. It's the Falcon Fuel, a little mouse pad, a little small one. This is your supporting documentation for the system itself. So there are all the components that are in here. So if I look, dude, everything is itemized. So one of the things that they kept in communication with while they built it, because they built this for this, it wasn't like sitting on a shelf, it was a custom build. they kind of kept me in the loop of all of the Q&A process. They're like, hey, your system's built, it's now sitting in QA, it's now getting tested. So they obviously test all of their builds. Long-term testing, what time the test started, what date it started, how long it ran for. Max burn-in test for Heaven on the GPU was a max temp of 66 degrees. And this little guy, they even have the VBIOS listed on here. The amount of detail that they go through on here is kind of nuts. Of all of the SIs we've ever worked with, I've never really received anything like this. I love this. Any brand that goes to this level of documentation stands by their product, as far as I'm concerned. Now, I've heard about Falcon Northwest for years. I've never worked with them before, so this is my first time doing anything with them. And then in here, it's probably leftover parts. Yeah, so here is our wireless antenna. This is our driver USB stick. The additional cooler hold downs for the sockets types that are not in here. So they give this to you, which is nice to have, even though you probably would never ever need it. Your Windows 11 keys and stuff. And this is a Z690 motherboard. So I was curious if it was a Z790 or a Z690, considering it's a 13th gen, but you can run a 13th gen on a 12th gen motherboard. So that's perfectly fine. All right, enough of the unboxing stuff. Let's get this situation kind of cleaned up here, and then let's break it open and look at the build quality itself. Okay, so here's the Fragbox. First thing I want to point out is on the back, they even make a little placard. This is metal, but it's got my name on it. I assume it'd be your name if you purchase this. It's just they put J2 Cents on there because that's obviously who they're working with. And a serial number and stuff. So, okay, that's pretty neat. If we take a tour around the Fragbox, it's so heavy though. It is very dense. On the front, we've got the Falcon Northwest logo, which I assume illuminates. That looks like an LED panel behind it. On the very top of the front right here is where we've got our power button, two USB 3.0, a headphone combo jack, and a USB-C / Thunderbolt maybe, more than likely just USB-C. And then on the back, like I've already showed you, you've got your horizontally laid out or posed ITX motherboard. We've got our RTX 4090 right here, which is a triple slot card. Our SFX power supply right here. I'm curious as to what the wattage they used is. So let's break into this. These are thumb screws. Ooh, look at that. Spring-loaded captive, so that slides right off. The build quality on this thing, man, it's just, it doesn't screw around. There is your AIO right there on top. Already, everything in here is so well managed in terms of the way it's laid out, the cable runs and all that. I'm not seeing a bunch of mess everywhere. Yes, we are having to use the, we had a whole conversation about this because obviously any SI that's using 40 series graphics cards was very concerned and worried about the adapter during the whole issue of them melting. Fortunately, Steve got to the bottom line through using third-party failure analysis labs on what happened. I like how NVIDIA basically piggybacked off his video after it went live saying, oh yeah, that's what we found too. Yeah, I don't think NVIDIA really found any of that crap. I think they literally just took Steve's credit and just said, yeah, that's exactly what we found. But anyway, there's a pretty tough bend on here, but as long as the plug is plugged in and fully seated, this won't be an issue. He did say though, that I'm basically the only one that received this with the 4-pin adapter because of the fact that they are working directly with Cable Mod for cables specifically for this build that are gonna be direct wire to pin and not using an adapter like this. So this was a little bit more difficult for them to have to cable manage and run. So if you are concerned about this cable, I don't think you necessarily need to be as long as you're competent enough to plug it in all the way. But keep in mind, I'm the one with this, you wouldn't be. Just want to point that out there. Like I said, we had entire discussions about this before this box even arrived. But you can see it is the Accelerate card from PNY. And yeah, on the top, what I love about this is you can see air clearly gets taken in right here. And I'll show you, the air coming through this panel right here is not just being pulled in by the graphics card, it is being force-fed air by two 120 millimeter fans. So you've got two fans blowing directly onto the intake of the RTX 4090, which is why those temps that they're saying 66C under load makes perfect sense in this particular instance. And then because we have this giant opening on the top right here, the air that's coming through these fins can just exhaust out the top. Now this is gonna be a positive pressure case. I'm not seeing any exhaust fans with the exception of over here on the CPU side, which is where the motherboard is. So this is pulling air out. Any air right here is gonna be more or less convection and then positive pressure pushed through with the graphics card. Because it's such a small area right here, I'm not sure if it would have even been prudent to put. You can see there's obviously 92mm slots right here, so I think maybe a whole row of 92mm exhaust might have been neat, but maybe overkill. I don't know. Based on these temperatures of 66°C, I don't think that's necessarily a problem. You have access to all of your Argb cables and everything right there. And then we'll take a look at the other side. Again, the same captive screws. This is an SX 1000 watt platinum SFX power supply. Man, do you remember the days when like getting anything over 500 watt SFX 80 plus, they call it 80 plus white now, but just 80 plus was hard? We have a 1000 watt 80 plus platinum SFX-L. It is an L, which means it's a little bit longer, but still the size of this thing. Okay, that's the reason why builds like this are even possible. You can see right here, look at all this space. They do such a good job. Okay, there is no bend in that at all. That is such a solid brick of copper cable right there. It's tight, it's so tight right there. Tight, bro. This would look even neater though, obviously, if they didn't have the adapter. You can see where the adapters are connecting right there. But check that out. You have unobstructed airflow. This right here is not obstruction. Luke from Linus Tech Tips years ago did a video where he shoved all the spare cables from all the power supplies he could find around the shop into a case, and it didn't affect cooling at all. So this is not obstruction. But remember, these coolers are blow-through style coolers, so you can actually see the heatsink in there. And so any of the air that's being pushed through the fan, through the graphics card, through the openings will just kind of push right through right there, or get exhausted out through the AIO. And then you can see right here, we have our Argb Kingston Fury. So yeah, it is DDR5. And look at these, look at the cable runs. I just love how they take the time to do all of this right here. Anyway, you know what we gotta do? We gotta put it all back together. And we've gotta hook it up, and we've gotta do some temperature testing, because even though they've already validated it, I need something to do. All right, here we are booted up. You can see the accelerate lighting is on right there, making a nice little X, and you can also see it all pairs very well with the J2Sense gaming mat, available at j2sense.com or store.j2sense, or even just below this video, you guys will find a link to it. I never noticed this before with 3rd gen though, or 13th gen. You get a package temp, a P-core temp, and an E-core temp. First, we're gonna start off with the graphics card here. The graphics card, because it's not water cooled, will hit its normalized temperature a lot faster. We're gonna use Speedway, which is a DX12 and a ray tracing title. I just want to point out, this thing is really quiet. This is my first time ever messing with the PNY version of the 4090. The Accelerate, pretty middle of the road. It's right around where an FE would go. And it is currently hotspots at 61 and the GPU's at 55. So they're still slowly rising, but it's not making like any noise. You could totally overclock this in this little chassis. I do feel some heat rising right out of here. The mesh panel is big enough to where air can flow through it nicely. Obviously, we have those two 120mm fans blowing directly on the graphics card. So what that's doing is that's providing some airflow over the fins that the fans are not responsible for, which on the graphics card, I mean. That way, the graphics card doesn't have to ramp up to an incredibly high fan speed. Yeah, 60.3 and the hotspot's at 68. Still locked at 2730 on the graphics. I'm gonna go ahead and, I'm gonna be that guy. I'm gonna go ahead and push it. 149 share. 2850. So it didn't really go up. So the fans are still only at 30% right now. And we're at 64C, 65C. Edge temp, 65C, hotspot 73. And it's still on at 30%. What does it sound like if I max it out? Okay, yeah, that you can hear.
What?
Well, it sounds that loud because those blades are turning right next to the other fan blades, which are turning at a very different flow rate. So it's very turbulent. But look, the temp's already come down to 60, 59. That's funny, going back to auto. I don't see a power slider on here, ironically. That's probably why it's not really going higher than 29, 25, even though I'm plus 213. Anyway, that's besides the point. I'm going back to stock. They said they saw 66C was where their burn-in test was on Heaven, probably, and that looped for hours and hours. And I bet you our ambient temperature in here is warmer than theirs. We have the heater on in here right now. Absolutely fantastic. Get it? Fantastic on the temperatures. On Cinebench is, we're gonna be asking a lot of it with a 13900K. Oh yeah, package went right to 97C. E cores are at 86, P cores are at 96. This is where it's designed to run because the clocks are right where they're supposed to be, 5.5 and 4.3. This is one of those deals where I feel like going through, and there's 98C, I feel like going through and doing voltage tuning would actually be very beneficial. Yeah, asking a 240 to cool down a 13900K, I mean, you're asking a lot of it, but we're still getting full clocks. 5.5 all core on the P core and 4.3 gigahertz on all the E cores. I have no doubt in my mind whatsoever that the enhancements are enabled. First and foremost, you have to understand Cinebench R23 is an unrealistic daily test burn-in, like example. Let's just go to Port Royal instead of Speedway. I would not feel comfortable overclocking a 13900K on just a standard Asetek 240 AIO. That's a personal opinion of mine. And I think Falcon Northwest is trying to squeeze every ounce of performance out of it. And although there's plenty of airflow in this chassis, it is the chip design that's the problem, not the chassis or the cooler. So while Port Royal is loading, we're at 58C. That is used 66C. This is using CPU to load, obviously. Yeah, 48C, 47C during the test. And it's obviously just a GPU test, but let's now venture into the BIOS and let's see what our BIOS settings are, because that will tell us everything. All right, so what do we have here for settings? AI tweaker, XMP is enabled, which is awesome. No, it's auto let BIOS. So Intel Adaptive Boost technology is on, that's fine. That's where it's gonna automatically adjust based on package cooling and all that. But it's ASUS multi-core enhancement is auto, lets BIOS optimized. Everything else is auto. So with the exception of turning on the XMP, it does not look to me like, yeah, it's the actual VRM core voltage, 1.412. Yeah, it sounds to me like they did not do any sort of overclocking in this. And I'm happy because with the exception of turning on XMP, which I feel like you should be doing, obviously, or you're paying for speed you didn't get, the temperatures that we're seeing is absolutely 100% everything to do with the ASUS BIOS voltage algorithm that it uses out of the box. Now here's the thing, the CPU is running within spec. You were getting the full speed out of it. You were getting the boost clocks they were holding even though they were hitting 100C. 105C is technically within spec. I just don't like running, that's like if I don't like running my engines at redline all the time. So let's not do that with our CPU. So this is now, and Falcon was like, hey, be brutally honest with our stuff, which I'm gonna do anyway, but this is the kind of thing I feel like maybe Falcon should have gone in and maybe tuned to bring the temps down a little bit to be safer, and then create a BIOS profile that's saved on here. That way the user can always enable it if they somehow reset their BIOS or something in some way. Okay, so I went ahead and just put all the limits back on. You might have noticed the 5.5 all core on P cores and 4.3 all core on E cores was actually an overclock because 5.3 gigahertz is the advertised and 5.2 gigahertz on the E cores is advertised. So by not allowing it to autoclock, which is ABT or the auto boost technology, basically is gonna say, let the core continue to ramp up clockwise and power limit wise until we basically reach our maximum temperatures available to the CPU, which is that 100+C, and I don't want that. So we're down to 5.3 and some are at 5.2 on P cores and 4.1 and 4.2 on the E cores, but our package temps are much more reasonable now. 93. They actually, 95 for a second. They actually started at 88C and then are climbing slowly. This is still 10C below TJ Maxx. Not great, but remember we are dealing with a 240 AIO, which is not, I wouldn't personally like to pair a 240 AIO with a 13900K, but our wattage is down now to the max 253 allotted to this particular CPU instead of the 273 watts. And remember, this is Cinebench R23. This is a very difficult test. This test is designed, it's like a modern Prime 95. It's intended to bring your CPU to its knees. This is not like, oh God, this CPU is just burning itself down in this system. No, this particular test is a stress test. It's like taking a piece of metal and going, how much can we bend it before it breaks? And then go, oh, well, it broke, therefore it's terrible. It's like, well, no, we pushed it to that point. So I'm gonna download Geekbench right now, which is another free download, and you guys can test this yourself if you want, that just pushes and tests your CPU under different conditions, both multi-core and single core, to kind of give yourself a randomly generated number based on performance that you can't really see is happening because it's all happening in tasks that are basically behind the scenes. You can't actually see it drawing or rendering anything. But it does put the CPU under stress. So what I want to do right now is compare this test, which is much more realistic. This is a CPU performance benchmark. It is not a stress test benchmark. I can't stress that enough. And look at our package temps. They're just, some are low, some are high. We're currently at 55C, 66. Now we're doing Gaussian blur, which is CPU rendered. Everything is fully loaded, but we're getting 5.5 and 4.3, which are the same cores or the same clock speeds we were getting at Cinebench, but in a much more realistic type of, and look, we're still at 165 watts for a second there. We were at 235, but we're in the 40s, 77, 40, 83. Now, Cinebench, I'd highly recommend if you want to stress test your cooling system. That is where I use Cinebench. It's a cooling system stress because it puts the CPU under so much load. It is gonna show up in your cooling system if it's inadequate. So the Fragbox from Falcon Northwest, it's pretty impressive. I mean, like I said, the fact that you can scale it however you want. I'm not gonna say non-compromising because you are compromising cooling, but that's specific to the hardware that was put in here. So it was an Intel build with the top of the tier CPU, the 13900K. We know it runs warm. In fact, running it with a giant 360 millimeter radiator in our bench test and stuff when we tested the CPU was still in the upper 80s on a 360 in an open air test bench. So obviously you drop down to a 280 here. And I know I called it 240 in the earlier parts of the video. I'm an idiot. It's a 280. It's still a decent amount of cooling, but it's limited because of the amount of surface area that you get just with the amount of rad liquid. And then AIOs already have very thin cold plates when it comes to making contact with the CPU. So these are the types of CPUs that have made water cooling necessary again. The 7950X with its super thick IHS, and then the 13900K and the 12900K with their 200 and anywhere between 225 watt to 253 watt with this guy. I mean, water cooling's a thing again because of the fact that we're such high power budgets now for CPUs and stuff, which means as you go small form factor like this, you start to see some limitations. Now here's the thing. You could run this all day, every day, with it in the high 90s to 100C. The CPU is going to protect itself and it's not gonna burn down. It's just, I know as PC enthusiasts, we're not comfortable with those temperatures. That's why I've gone through as much work as I have, like delidding my 7950X and doing all the testing and stuff on that, because we, at least folks like me, are enthusiasts about squeezing out every ounce of performance and every degree of cooling that we possibly can. But if you're not that kind of person, you saw by me just changing a few settings in the BIOS, I was able to bring this down nearly 10C with a very small impact on performance by bringing the overall turbo clocks down 100 to 200 megahertz. In gaming and stuff, if you don't care about Cinebench R23 as a cooling test, you could run it out of the box settings as the Asus motherboard has it with you're gonna be fine. You're gonna see 80s, maybe 90C, depending on the game that you play, depending on the ambient temperatures and fan speeds. I didn't touch the fan curve on this. We could have also put the fans at 100%, which would have helped. But the fact that this thing right now, I have to stick my mic up against it to maybe hear the fans. It's pretty bonkers what you can cram into this small box. I like calling it a box because it really does look like a box. In fact, I think it looks like a Ghostbusters ghost trap. It's just missing the little handle on the back, you know, the one they would throw out. But anyway, it kind of reminds me of that. Plenty of cooling. In my mind, I thought it was gonna be the other way around. I thought the CPU was gonna be fine. The GPU was gonna be hey, we're getting kind of warm. It was totally the opposite. The GPU, low 60s, the CPU, much warmer than any enthusiast would want. But remember, this is a top tier product. This is the max spec that you could build this thing out as. So you don't have to go this high. You can go with like a 13600K, or you can go with like a 7600X or a 7700X, and you could go with like a 3090 or a 3080 or whatever 30 series are still available, or 40 series, and not have to worry about it, you know, in terms of performance. It's tested at their factory. It's certified. If there were any problems, they're gonna find it and they're gonna fix it. And they have all the warranty and all of the customer support backing it up once it reaches you, like we've already showed with all the documentation and stuff. So this is my first time really doing anything with Falcon Northwest. It's a brand I've definitely heard of over the years. I'm impressed. I'm impressed with this whole setup. I think it's definitely worth considering if you are shopping for a small form factor. If you're not, you have other form factors all the way from thin and light notebooks all the way up to big monstrous gaming towers that you can choose from. They're gonna help you design it and make sure it's exactly what you want and get the most for your money. Anyway, there's links down below, you guys can check it out. Huge thanks to Falcon Northwest for sending us this PC to take a look at. And as always guys, we will see you in the next one. So the Fragbox from Norkin Southwest, the Greg Fox Forkin Northwest. It's been a long weekend.